It was Christmas Eve. A 5-year-old girl, barefoot and wounded, was brutally thrown out of a packed church full of elegantly dressed parishioners. She fell backward onto the icy steps under indifferent stares. No one reached out, except for a man who was watching everything from the last row. What happened next would forever change both their destinies and reveal a secret that neither of them could have imagined. Subscribe to the channel for heartwarming stories every day. Snow fell slowly over the city, covering the streets with a white blanket that transformed everything into a postcard scene. In store windows, lights blinked in celebratory rhythm, while families walked hand in hand, carrying bags of gifts and warm smiles. It was Christmas Eve, and the magic of the holiday seemed to envelop every corner. Inside St. Patrick's Cathedral, one of the city's most historic churches, the choir sang Christmas carols with polished voices and rehearsed emotion. The varnished wooden pews were filled with worshippers dressed in their finest clothes, dark suits, cocktail dresses, understated but expensive jewelry. The scent of imported cologne mingled with the aroma of scented candles and fresh flowers that decorated the altar. Families took their usual seats, greeting each other with air kisses and polite smiles. Well-dressed children ran between the pews, quickly reprimanded by parents concerned about appearances. Everyone seemed to be playing their roles in the grand theatrical performance of Christmas religiosity. The priest, a middle-aged man with perfectly combed graying hair, gestured dramatically as he spoke about brotherly love and Christian compassion. His voice echoed through the hall through a modern sound system, each word absorbed by attentive ears that nodded in automatic agreement. But in the last row, almost hidden in the shadows of the Gothic pillars, a man watched everything with empty eyes. He wasn't wearing a suit like the others, just dark jeans and a simple shirt. His brown hair, normally styled with gel, was disheveled, and his hands, which used to display solid gold rings, were bare. He owned one of the largest jewelry store chains in the country. Heir to a fortune built over 3 generations, known in business circles for his coldness in negotiations and his ability to turn any metal into gold. Apartments in 3 cities, imported cars, bank accounts he never needed to check. All of that seemed meaningless at that moment. For 2 years, since losing his wife and unborn child in an accident during a religious pilgrimage abroad, he had come to this church not out of faith, but out of an inexplicable need. Maybe it was the proximity to the last place where he could still feel something akin to hope. Maybe it was just the habit of someone who no longer knew how to fill the void. Outside, the same snow that embellished the store windows fell on a small, huddled figure on the sidewalk. The 5-year-old girl pressed her face against the icy glass of the church, her brown eyes shining with the reflection of the golden lights that danced inside. She couldn't hear the priest's words, but she saw the movements of his lips, the gestures of communion, the warm embraces between strangers. Her clothes, a faded pink blouse twice the size of her body, and a skirt that had once been blue, were wet with snow and torn in several places. Her bare feet, red with cold, had small but visible cuts, marks of days walking through rough streets. Her brown hair, once curly and shiny, was now tangled and dirty. But it was her face that told the most painful story. Despite the dust and the marks of dried tears, there was an innocent beauty that resisted the harshness of life. Her large eyes maintained a spark of hope that seemed impossible to extinguish, even after months of abandonment. She especially watched the children inside, sitting on the laps of attentive parents, receiving absent-minded caresses in their hair, being pulled closer when they showed restlessness. Her small fingers traced invisible circles on the fogged glass, as if trying to touch that reality that seemed to exist only on the other side of the world. The cold cut through her thin clothes like ice blades, but she didn't move. There was something in that scene that magnetized her, not only the physical warmth that emanated from inside the church, but something deeper, a sense of belonging that she vaguely recognized, like an echo of a life she might have had or dreamed of having. Inside, the millionaire noticed a movement in the periphery of his vision. Through the side windows, he could distinguish a small silhouette pressed against the main glass. For a moment, their eyes met through the reflection, and he felt a pang in his chest that he couldn't explain. The girl, realizing that she was being watched, didn't move away. Instead, she offered a shy smile and waved her small hand. He didn't return the gesture, but he didn't look away either. There was something about that child that reminded him of something lost, something he preferred not to remember. The choir began to sing "Silent Night," and the collective voice filled every corner of the church with a harmony that should bring peace. But for the millionaire, each note sounded like a painful reminder of Christmases past, when he still believed that love could last forever. The girl outside moved her lips, trying to follow the melody she knew by heart, even without being able to hear the words clearly. Her frozen hands beat one on her chest, trying to warm the heart that seemed about to stop beating. And so, separated only by a glass wall, two worlds coexisted, one of material abundance and emotional emptiness, another of absolute deprivation, but with a thirst for love that still pulsed strongly. Neither of them knew that their lives were about to intertwine in a way that would forever change the meaning of Christmas for both. The ceremony was coming to an end when the girl made a decision that would change everything. She had watched for almost an hour through the glass, seeing people greet each other, hug each other, share warm smiles. The snow continued to fall, and her feet no longer had any feeling. But something inside her, a voice that she couldn't ignore, whispered that she belonged in that place, at least for a few minutes. With hesitant steps, she walked to the main door of the church. The dark, carved wood seemed like an insurmountable barrier, but it was ajar. Through the gap, she could see the golden light from inside and hear more clearly the voices that sang about peace and love. She took a deep breath, gathered all the courage she had, and pushed the door. The sound of the creaking hinge echoed through the hall, but few turned around. She took a few timid steps, staying close to the side wall, trying not to draw attention. Her goal was simple: to find a corner where she could warm up, maybe hear a few kind words about family and hope. But the smell arrived before her. It wasn't just the odor of wet clothes or days without a bath. It was the complex and unmistakable aroma of extreme poverty, mixed with fear and despair. Some heads began to turn, noses wrinkling discreetly, glances of disapproval exchanged in silence. The millionaire, still in the last row, immediately noticed the change in the atmosphere. He saw when the girl entered, observed the judging looks that began to form, felt the tension spreading like invisible waves through the hall. Something inside him tightened, a mixture of anticipation and dread for what was about to happen. The girl continued forward, her steps leaving small watermarks on the red carpet that led to the altar. She had no idea of the impact her presence was causing. Her eyes were fixed on the candles that shone like earthly stars, on the flowers that exuded perfumes she had never smelled, on the golden crucifix that seemed to radiate its own light. That's when the deacon saw her. A 50-year-old man, impeccably dressed in a black suit and red tie, who for 20 years had watched over the order and decorum of that house of prayer. His eyes widened when he noticed the discordant figure walking toward the main pews, where the city's most influential families occupied their traditional places. He moved quickly through the side aisles, his firm footsteps echoing a purpose that admitted no questioning. Some parishioners began to whisper to each other, discreetly pointing to the girl who continued walking, oblivious to what was approaching. "Hey, you!" The deacon's voice cut through the air like a whip. "What do you think you're doing here? You can't come in here in that condition. You're disturbing the service." His voice was now loud enough for everyone to hear. The choir stopped singing, and an awkward silence filled the room. The priest, realizing the situation, made a discreet gesture for the deacon to lower his voice, but the man was determined to resolve the situation quickly. He grabbed the girl's arm with unnecessary force, ignoring the small moan of pain she let out. "You shouldn't be here. There are appropriate places for people like you." His words were pointed, loaded with a prejudice that tried to disguise itself as social order. The girl looked around, hoping someone would say something, that someone would defend her. But she found only looks of discomfort and faces that turned away to avoid eye contact. Some people whispered among themselves, others checked their phones as if nothing was happening. "Please," she managed to murmur, her voice so low that it was almost unheard. "I just wanted to warm up a little." His hands clenched into fists, and a rage that he hadn't felt in years began to boil in his veins. But still, he didn't move. Some part of him was paralyzed, watching the scene as if he were a spectator in a terrible movie. "Get out and don't come back!" The deacon opened the door violently and without any hesitation pushed the girl with such force that she lost her balance completely. She fell backward on the stone steps, her small body hitting the steps with a sound that echoed in the silent night. For a moment, she lay still, the shock of the impact mixed with the physical and emotional pain. Then, slowly, she began to get up, trembling not only from cold, but from humiliation. The deacon slammed the door shut, wiped his hands on his pants as if he had touched something contaminated, and returned to his post with a satisfied smile. Some people sighed in relief, others resumed interrupted conversations, and in a few minutes, it was as if nothing had happened. But for the millionaire, something fundamental had broken. He looked around, seeing people resume their routines of devotion, as if they had just witnessed an act of charity instead of cruelty. The priest continued the sermon where he had left off, talking about unconditional love and Christian welcome, while a 5-year-old child cried alone on the icy sidewalk. Something inside him awakened, a fury that he hadn't felt since his wife's death, an indignation that he thought he had buried along with his dreams of fatherhood. He stood up abruptly, ignoring the curious looks of the nearby worshippers, and walked toward the door with determined steps. Outside, the girl was sitting on the bottom step, hugging her knees to her chest, trying to contain the sobs that escaped between her trembling lips. The snow continued to fall, creating a white layer on her shoulders, as if the sky itself was trying to cover her with a cloak of protection. She didn't realize when the door opened again, nor when a shadow approached. She only looked up when she saw a pair of shoes standing in front of her. The millionaire stood still for a few seconds, looking at the girl who was trying to hide behind her own arms. The anger he had felt moments before turned into something more complex, a mixture of compassion and recognition that he couldn't explain. She reminded him of something deep, something he preferred to keep buried. "Are you hurt?" His voice came out more rough than he intended, loaded with years of emotional disuse. The girl looked up slowly, meeting the face of a man who didn't seem to want to hurt her. There was something different about him, a sadness that she recognized because she also carried her own. She shook her head timidly, indicating that she wasn't physically hurt, although her red eyes said otherwise about her emotional state. He took off his coat, a gray overcoat that cost more than many people earned in a month, and held it out to her. "You're freezing." She had learned to distrust the kindness of adults, especially after months wandering the streets. But there was something genuine in that gesture, something that touched a part of her that still believed in small miracles. When she accepted the coat, he crouched down to be at her eye level. The fabric was soft and smelled of an expensive cologne, but most importantly, it was warm. She wrapped herself in it as if it were a hug. "What's your name?" He asked the question automatically, but immediately regretted it. He didn't want to get involved. He didn't want to know details that would make the situation more personal than it was already becoming. "I don't have a proper name," she replied with a simplicity that caught him off guard. "The lady at the shelter called me Kid. The woman at the bus stop called me poor thing. On the street, people call me get lost. There was a resigned acceptance in her voice that was more painful than any crying or complaining. She spoke of her social invisibility as if it were a natural fact, something that had always been this way. "Everyone has a name," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "I used to," she admitted, playing with the sleeves of the coat that were too big for her arms. "But my mom took it when she left. Said I didn't deserve it anymore." She pointed to a park bench across the street where there were some cardboard boxes stacked. "There, but when it rains a lot, I look for an awning." "You must be hungry," he said finally, standing up and extending his hand. "Let's get something to eat." "No," he replied, surprised by the firmness in his own voice. "I'm not going to take you away." He slowed down automatically, adapting to her pace without realizing he was doing it. They found a small diner that was still open, the kind of place he would normally never frequent. The owner, an elderly man who wiped down counters with repetitive movements, looked strangely at the unlikely couple who came through the door. "2 pizzas," he ordered, ignoring the curious glances of the few customers who were still there. "And a hot chocolate." She nodded enthusiastically, a genuine smile appearing on her lips for the first time that night. "It's the best chocolate I've ever had in my life." While they waited for the food to arrive, she began to tell him about her life on the streets, about the people she met, about the dreams she had every night. She spoke about a mother who had promised to return, about a house that existed only in her imagination, about a God that she was sure would one day hear her. Each word was like a needle in his heart. He wanted to get up, pay the bill, and get out of there before that connection became deeper. But there was something in her voice, in the way her eyes sparkled when she talked about hope, that kept him glued to the chair. "Why did you help me?" she asked the question suddenly, interrupting her own stories. He didn't know how to answer immediately. The truth was that he didn't know why he had gotten up from the church chair, why he had gone after her, why he was there at that moment. There was something instinctive in his actions, something that went beyond logic. "Because you didn't deserve to be treated that way," he said finally. "But I'm dirty," she replied with the same devastating simplicity as before. "And I don't have a family. The man at the church was right." Anger at a society that allowed children to be treated as inconveniences. Anger at a religion that preached love but practiced exclusion. Anger at himself for taking so long to act. The pizza arrived, and she ate as if she hadn't seen food in days, which was probably true. He barely touched his, too busy observing her every movement, every expression of pleasure with something as basic as a hot meal. But as the night wore on, reality began to knock at the door. What would he do with her when the diner closed? Where would she sleep? What was his plan? He had no experience with children. He didn't know how to deal with responsibilities of that kind. The voice of reason in his head grew louder and louder, reminding him of all the reasons why he should walk away. He had built a carefully organized life to avoid exactly this kind of emotional complication. The diner was about to close when the millionaire finally made a decision that would change both their lives. He looked at the girl who had finished eating and was now playing with the paper napkins, folding them into shapes that only she could see, and knew that he couldn't simply let her go back to the street. "Do you have any place safe to sleep tonight?" He asked the question knowing what the answer would be, but he needed to hear it. She shook her head, her eyes dropping to the table. "But I manage, I always manage." On the way to the hotel, he called his personal assistant, an efficient woman who was used to solving complicated problems without asking questions. "I need an additional room at the hotel, with a bathtub, and some children's clothes, size of a 5-year-old, now. May I ask if it's urgent?" "Is it a palace?" she whispered, as if speaking loudly could break the spell. "No, it's just a hotel," he replied, but seeing it through her eyes, he realized that it really did look like a palace. "Let's go up." There was something liberating in those moments of pure childish joy. The room that his assistant had secured was adjacent to his, with a connecting door that could be locked or unlocked as needed. When they opened the door, they found an environment that had been transformed. Children's clothes neatly arranged on the bed, toiletries appropriate for children, even some basic toys. The girl's eyes filled with tears when she saw all that. "Is this all for me? Do you want to take a bath?" he asked, remembering that she probably hadn't had that luxury in a long time. She nodded enthusiastically, and he guided her to the bathroom. The bathtub was big enough for 3 adults, but to her it seemed like a private lake. He turned on the faucets, tested the water temperature, and poured in some bath salts that made fragrant foam. "Do you know how to wash yourself?" he asked, realizing that he had no idea how to take care of a child. "I sure do," she replied proudly. "I'm big already. Is it a family situation? If you need anything else, I'll be available." Clean and dressed appropriately, she looked like a normal child, the kind he saw playing in parks or coming out of private schools. "I feel different," she admitted, spinning so that he could see the pajamas. "I feel like a princess." "Are you going to stay here?" she asked, and he could hear the fear in her voice, the fear of waking up and finding that it had all been a dream. "I'm going to stay in the room next door," he assured. "The door stays open if you need anything." She closed her eyes with a smile on her lips, and in a few minutes she was sleeping soundly. He watched for a while, noticing how her relaxed face revealed the child that she really was, free from the worries she shouldn't carry. When he finally went to his own room, he couldn't sleep. He lay in bed looking at the ceiling, wondering what he had done, what he would do the next day, how he would explain that situation to anyone. But underneath all the uncertainty, there was something he hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of purpose. At 3 a.m, he heard a small cry coming from her room. He got up immediately and found the girl sitting on the bed, trembling and crying softly. "Nightmare?" he asked gently. She nodded, wiping her nose on the sleeve of her pajamas. "I dreamed that I woke up on the street again, that all this was a lie, and for the first time since his wife's death, he felt useful for something other than making money." When she woke up the next day, the first thing she did was look for him. When she saw him still there, sleeping uncomfortably in the armchair, her face lit up with a smile that could melt the most hardened heart. "You stayed," she whispered, as if she still didn't quite believe it. "I said I would," he replied, stretching and massaging his sore neck. And that's how a new phase began for both of them. Him learning to take care of someone other than himself, her learning to trust that not all adults disappeared. Neither of them knew that this was just the first night of a journey that would reveal secrets that would change their lives forever. The following days turned into a routine that neither of them had experienced before. The millionaire, used to waking up early only to check international markets and financial reports, now found himself getting up to prepare simple breakfasts and make sure the girl had slept well. She, in turn, who had spent months waking up cold and afraid, now opened her eyes in clean, soft sheets, certain that there would be hot food waiting for her. He had cancelled all work appointments for the week between Christmas and New Year's, something he had never done in his life. His secretary was perplexed, his partners worried, but he couldn't explain the urgency he felt to be present, to understand who this child was who had entered his life so unexpectedly. During breakfast on the second day, she told him more about her story. She spoke in a fragmented way, as small children do, mixing timelines and jumping between memories that sometimes seem contradictory. But little by little, he began to put together the puzzle of her life. "My mom had hair like mine," she said, playing with the curls now clean and shiny, "but she always said that I got my stubbornness from my dad. That's why she never told him I existed." Some glances were of curiosity, others of tacit approval for his generosity. Few seemed to perceive the genuine connection that was developing between them. In the children's clothing store, she was paralyzed before so many options. "Can I choose anyone?" she asked, touching delicately a blue dress as if it might disappear. You can choose as many as you want, he replied, and saw her eyes fill with tears of joy. The saleswoman, a friendly middle-aged lady, approached to help. Your daughter is beautiful, she commented naturally. She has your eyes. When they left the store with several bags, she held his hand tightly, as if she wanted to make sure that he wouldn't disappear in the middle of the crowd. Can I call you something other than sir? She asked as they walked. The question caught him off guard. He hadn't thought about it. She really didn't know how to address him. What would you like to call me? I always wanted to have an uncle, especially about the mother, a young woman who may have worked as an assistant or in similar positions about 6 years ago. He panicked in a way he hadn't experienced since. Never. He didn't know how to measure temperature correctly, what medications to give, whether he should take her to the hospital immediately or wait. He called 3 different doctors before he could get one to make a house call at the hotel. It's just a common cold, the doctor assured after examining her. Children who have lived on the streets sometimes get sick when they're finally in safe environments. It's like the body finally allows itself to be vulnerable. My mom never took care of me when I got sick. Sometimes we learn to take care of ourselves, he replied carefully. But it's better when someone takes care of us, she said with the simple wisdom of children. Makes the hurt less. A sense of recognition that came from somewhere very deep inside him. On the 5th day, the detective called with preliminary information. I found some interesting leads, sir. There are records of a young woman who worked as a travel assistant about 6 years ago. Her name was Marina Santos. She disappeared from employment records shortly after leaving a specific job. What kind of job? Are you there? He took her to the park, where she ran on the grass, as if she had never seen so much green space in one place. He watched as she fed ducks in the pond, talked with other children on the playground, laughed freely and carefree. Uncle, she said as she swung, her hair flying in the wind. Do you think my mom is okay, wherever she is? Why are you thinking about that? He asked, pushing the swing gently. Because I like being with you, but sometimes I get sad thinking that maybe she's looking for me. She stopped swinging and looked at him with a seriousness that didn't match her age. Do you think it's wrong to be happy when someone who should love us has left? She wasn't just an abandoned child. She was a little person trying to understand adult concepts of love, loyalty, and loss. It's not wrong to be happy, he said, kneeling down to her level. Your mother made a choice that had nothing to do with your worth as a person. You deserve to be happy regardless of the choices that others have made. He hadn't thought of that possibility, hadn't considered that this temporary situation could become even more complicated. But looking into her eyes, full of fear and hope mixed together, he knew that regardless of what he discovered about the past, he couldn't simply let her go to an uncertain situation. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, he said finally. For now, you're safe and that's what matters. Sir, I need to talk to you in person. I found information that, well, it's better if we discuss it face to face. The girl is sleeping. In the past 6 days, she had become an integral part of his routine, of his thoughts, of his plans for the immediate future. The idea that something could complicate that growing relationship terrified him in a way he didn't want to admit. The detective arrived punctually, a serious 50-year-old man that he had hired several times for corporate investigations. But this time, there was something different in his expression, a mixture of astonishment and caution that made the millionaire even more nervous. Have a seat, the detective said, opening a folder full of documents. What I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, but I've verified the information 3 times. There's no doubt. You can talk. He remembered immediately that trip, the last one he had taken with his wife, the pilgrimage that they had planned as a way to strengthen their faith and their marriage before the arrival of their first child. The trip that had turned into tragedy when she suffered the accident that resulted in her death and the loss of the baby. "That's not possible," he murmured. But even as he denied it, images began to surface in his mind. A young assistant with curly brown hair, always helpful, always present in the moments when they needed help with logistics. "There's more," the detective continued, taking photographs out of the folder. "I got a photo of her from the company files. The woman with whom he had had a deep conversation about loss and faith on the night his wife was in the hospital." "No!" he whispered, but the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together with a terrible clarity. "Her daughter was born exactly 9 months after the end of that trip," the detective continued inexorably. "And there's one more thing that will shock you. I gained access to the child's medical records from when she was briefly sheltered in an institution a few months ago. There's information about blood type, basic genetic characteristics." The detective paused dramatically. "Sir, based on the data I have about you from corporate and medical records from years prior, there's a very high probability that this child is your biological daughter." He looked towards the room where the girl was sleeping, and suddenly everything made sense. The physical similarities that everyone noticed, the instinctive connection he had felt from the first moment, the way she had fit into his life, as if she had always belonged there. How is that possible?" he managed to murmur finally. "From the records I was able to access, your wife was hospitalized for 2 days during the trip with pregnancy complications. On those nights, you were visibly upset, drinking alone at the hotel bar. Marina Santos was off duty, but went to find you to offer support. And Marina, appearing with her natural kindness, offering a conversation, a shoulder, an understanding that he hadn't found in anyone else. I cheated on my wife," he said in a low voice, reality hitting him like a train. "Sir, with all due respect, your wife was in an induced coma. The doctors didn't know if she would survive, and you were in a situation of extreme stress. The circumstances were, I cheated on my pregnant wife, and when Marina tried to tell me about the pregnancy, I said it had been a mistake, that I was a married man, that she should forget about me completely. And during all that time, my other daughter was growing up alone in the world. She was coming back from work. She had gotten a job as a cleaner in a hospital. Apparently, she tried to raise her daughter alone, but the financial difficulties were enormous. The girl was found wandering alone a few days after her mother's funeral. The last one abandoned her about 4 months ago. A DNA test would be conclusive. I can arrange a discreet test." Around 4 in the morning, he heard a small movement in her room. She appeared at the door, with her hair tousled and holding her teddy bear. "Uncle, are you okay? I heard voices." "I was just thinking. You make me happy." In that moment, he made a silent promise, not just to take care of her, but to spend the rest of his life making up for the years she had spent without the father she had always had the right to know. The results of the DNA test arrived 3 days later, confirming what his heart already knew with absolute certainty. She was his biological daughter. 99.9% genetic compatibility. There were no more doubts. There was no more denying the reality that had revealed itself so unexpectedly. He was looking at the papers when she ran into the room, wearing one of the new dresses they had bought, her hair tied in a ponytail that she had learned to do by herself. "Uncle, did you see? I managed to do my hair just like the princess in the movie." How do you tell a 5-year-old that the uncle she had learned to love was, in fact, the father she had never known? How do you explain that he had rejected her mother when she tried to tell him about the pregnancy? But before he could fully process those questions, the phone rang. It was his assistant, and the urgency in her voice immediately alerted him to a problem. "Sir, I need to speak with you immediately. There's a situation that requires your urgent attention." How did they find out where we are? "The company board has already called 3 times this morning. They want an emergency meeting. There are concerns about how this may affect the company's image, about your ability to make rational decisions. But it's not going to be the kind of meeting they expect. The cleaning lady said it's because of me. Her voice became small. "Did I do something wrong?" "No one is going to take you away from me," he promised. And for the first time since discovering the truth, he spoke with complete certainty. No one. There would be legal questions about how a child without proper documentation had appeared in his life, investigations into his motives, pressure from all sides for him to act sensibly and return the girl to the system. What they didn't know, what no one yet knew, was that it wasn't about charity or emotional impulse. It was about a father finally finding the daughter he had unknowingly rejected. The meeting took place in the company's main office, a conference room with panoramic views of the city that he had designed to intimidate competitors and impress investors. Today, however, he was the one being intimidated, or at least that was the intention of the 5 men in suits who were waiting for him with grave expressions. They were members of the board of directors, minority partners who had invested in the company over the years and who now felt entitled to question his personal decisions. He had known them for more than a decade, had closed million-dollar deals with them, but at that moment he saw them as hostile strangers. "We need to talk about this situation with the child," began the oldest of the group, a man in his 60s who had always treated business as a cold war. "The media is speculating, our clients are asking questions, and this is affecting our corporate image. That raises questions about your mental stability, your ability to judge." They were reducing his decision to care for his own daughter to an inadequate grieving mechanism. "And what would be the proper way, in your opinion?" "As if she were an object that you can simply return to the store." "Because you don't even know her real name," the leader of the group replied, with a condescending smile. "I read the report that our legal team prepared. A child without documentation, without a verifiable history, possibly with psychological problems due to the traumas she has lived through. You are putting yourself at legal and financial risk for a stranger." He looked at each of those men, people he had worked with for years, and saw exactly the kind of mindset that had thrown his daughter out of a church on Christmas Eve. "I'm going to make you an offer," he said, standing up from his chair. "You have 2 options. First, you support my decision and we stop discussing my personal life in business meetings. Second, I buy all of your shares in the company at market value and you look for other investments. But one thing is certain, I'm not going to abandon this child to satisfy your concerns about corporate image. No longer as a temporary benefactor or a reluctant protector, as a father who had found his daughter and wouldn't abandon her again." "A father?" The leader laughed dismissively. "You haven't even known this child for 2 weeks. That kind of emotional attachment is exactly what we're questioning." There were 3 reporters in the lobby trying to bribe employees to get information about the girl. One of them had managed to get to the floor where their rooms were and was trying to convince a housekeeper to let him take a quick look at the child. "Get out," he said in a voice that made everyone turn around immediately. "Now!" "She's a 5-year-old child who deserves privacy and protection. If I see any of you near her again, my lawyers will make your lives very complicated." "They left," he confirmed, sitting down next to her on the bed. "And they're not coming back." It didn't matter what the partners thought, what the media speculated, or what legal complications might arise. That was his daughter, and he would spend the rest of his life protecting her from a world that had tried to reject her since birth. "Uncle?" she murmured against his chest. "Can I ask you something?" She was trying to understand if she was wanted, if there was something in her that made him want to take care of her beyond simple charity. She didn't know that she was asking the deepest question possible, about her true identity. "If I had a real daughter," he said carefully, "I would want her to be exactly like you. Brave, kind, smart, and beautiful. The best things in life always bring a little trouble." The complication arrived in the form of a middle-aged woman wearing an impeccable grey suit, carrying a leather briefcase, and an expression that admitted no discussion. She introduced herself as a social worker from the Child Protective Services and had come to assess the situation of the girl. "We received several anonymous complaints questioning the suitability of this situation," she explained, sitting rigidly in the hotel room while examining documents in her briefcase. "A single man without proven experience with children who suddenly assumes informal custody of a minor in a vulnerable situation. I need to talk to the girl alone, inspect the conditions in which she is living, and assess whether this situation is truly beneficial for her. Where is the child now? I'd like to talk to you about how you're feeling here. I just want to make sure that you're being well cared for." Thompson asked questions that seemed designed to confuse and frighten the girl. She questioned her about discipline, about rules, about whether she felt forced to be grateful. Each question made the child withdraw further, until finally she began to cry. "That's enough," he said, standing up abruptly. "You can see that she's clearly distressed by this interrogation. And what I see is a child who seems excessively attached to a man she barely knows. This may indicate Stockholm Syndrome or inappropriate emotional dependency. In the meantime, I suggest you reflect on what's really best for this child." He was a 50-year-old man, an expert in complex adoption and custody cases, whom he had consulted years before when he was thinking about adopting with his wife. "The situation is complicated," the attorney admitted after hearing the whole story. "You informally assumed custody of a child without going through the appropriate legal channels. Technically, this could be seen as kidnapping, even if your intentions are genuine. I saved her from a dangerous situation. 99.9% compatibility. But we need to act fast. From this moment on, any attempt to remove the child from his custody would be considered a violation of his parental rights." He said he was her uncle. "They're not going to take you away," he confirmed, kneeling down to be at her level. "In fact, we have a very important thing to talk about." "Well, I discovered something very important. You're not just like I would want my daughter to be." He paused, searching for the right words. "You are my real daughter. I'm your daddy." 3 weeks after the revelation of his paternity, when the legal dust had settled and the official documents were being processed, the millionaire made a decision that would surprise everyone who thought they knew him. He was driving through the city with his daughter in the back seat, humming a song they had learned together on the radio, when he passed in front of St. Patrick's Cathedral, the same church where everything had started. The same place where she had been humiliated and rejected on the night that changed both their lives. "Daddy," she said suddenly, interrupting the music, "that's the church where the bad man pushed me." "Yes, that's the church. I want to show them who you really are," he replied, getting out of the car and opening the door for her. "And I want to show you that no place is too good for you." The same deacon who had expelled his daughter was presiding over the meeting, gesturing dramatically as he spoke about maintaining the standards of the community. "Excuse me," he said, his voice echoing through the silent hall. "We would like to talk to you." There were about 30 people there, local business owners, homemakers, professionals, people who considered themselves good and religious, but who had remained silent when a child was brutally rejected in their presence. "A few weeks ago, this girl was thrown out of this church in the cruelest way possible," he began, keeping his voice calm but charged with emotion. "She had come in only to warm up, to feel a little of the love and compassion that you sing about in your hymns. Sir, if there was some misunderstanding, I came to offer you an opportunity, a chance for you to demonstrate who you really are when no one is watching. There will be daily meals for those who are hungry, clothes for those who need them, a safe place to sleep for those who have nowhere to stay. Or the money will go to another institution that is willing to learn. Would you like to cut the ribbon at the inauguration?" Several people lowered their heads, some began to cry silently. The deacon who had expelled her was visibly shaken. 2 days later, the phone rang. It was the priest. "We accept your conditions," he said simply, "and we would like to formally apologize to your daughter." There were reporters, local authorities, representatives of other religious institutions who wanted to understand how such a radical transformation had happened so quickly. But for him, the most important moment was when his daughter, wearing a new blue dress and with her hair in braids that she had learned to do herself, cut the red ribbon at the entrance of the transformed church. "Now it's a place where all children can come in?" she asked, looking up at him with bright eyes. "Now it's a place where all children are welcome," he confirmed. The deacon approached hesitantly. He had lost weight in recent weeks, and his eyes carried the weight of a guilt that he had finally recognized. "Little girl," he said softly, "I would like to apologize for what I did to you that night. It was wrong, cruel, and completely contrary to everything I should represent. My daddy said everyone deserves a second chance." "Daddy, do you think my mom would know that you found me? And I think she knows that you are exactly where you're supposed to be. Not just because he had found his daughter, but because he had found a purpose that went beyond business, beyond the accumulation of wealth, beyond anything he had considered important before. He had found the simple and profound joy of being a father, of protecting, of loving unconditionally, and in transforming his pain into an instrument of healing for others who had experienced the same abandonment that his daughter had. A year after the Christmas Eve that changed their lives, the millionaire found himself in a situation he had never imagined. He was sitting on the floor of a living room decorated with children's drawings taped to the walls, helping his daughter assemble a 1,000-piece puzzle that they had started the previous weekend. "Daddy, this piece looks like a cloud, but I can't find where it fits," she said, furrowing her brow in concentration in a way that reminded him of himself when he was a child. "Sometimes the pieces that seem to have no place are the most important," he replied, watching her try different positions. "They're just waiting for the right moment to find where they belong." "Like I was before you found me?" Children who had grown up in stability had different rhythms, different knowledge, different fears. But her teacher, a wise 40-year-old woman who worked specifically with children in transition, had helped both her and him navigate this new reality. "She has an extraordinary capacity for empathy," the teacher had explained during a meeting. "Children who have experienced trauma often develop a special sensitivity to the suffering of others. It's a superpower that needs to be channeled positively." In 12 months, they had served more than 200 children in vulnerable situations. Some stayed only one night. Others remained for weeks until permanent solutions were found. All were treated with the dignity that his daughter had been denied that fateful night. He visited the center regularly, always accompanied by her. It was amazing to watch how the younger children naturally gravitated toward the girl who had been the first to be welcomed there. She told stories, taught games, and more importantly, offered something that only someone who had gone through the same experience could give, the certainty that it was possible to get to the other side. "Daddy," she said suddenly, interrupting his thoughts, "do you remember that first night in the hotel? Now I know you'll never leave, but sometimes I still check to see if you're here. And when you get really old and can't carry me in your arms anymore?" He worked to ensure that she had all the opportunities she deserved and to continue expanding the work of the Welcoming Center. There were plans to open similar centers in other cities. Politicians had begun to reach out to him for discussions about public policies for children at risk. Universities wanted him to lecture about corporate social responsibility. But he knew that none of that would have meaning if it weren't for the girl who was now trying to fit a heart-shaped puzzle piece. "I did it!" she shouted triumphantly when the piece finally found its place. "Look, Daddy, it was part of the sun!" "You were right about the important pieces appearing at the right moment." That night, after the dinner that he had learned to cook especially for her, pasta with tomato sauce in the shape of butterflies, because she said that pretty food tasted better, she asked a question that caught him completely off guard. "Daddy, if you could go back in time and change anything, would you?" There was so much that could be different. He could have recognized Marina when she tried to tell him about the pregnancy. He could have been a present father from birth. He could have spared his daughter years of abandonment and suffering. "I would change the fact that you spent so much time alone," he said finally. "I would change the fact that I wasn't there to protect you from the beginning. Maybe I wouldn't know how to help other children who feel lost." Our story is perfect exactly as it happened. The walls were covered with drawings that she had made. Happy families, houses with gardens full of flowers, children playing together without distinction. But there was a specific drawing that always caught his attention, taped right next to her bed. It was a simple image of two figures holding hands, one big, one small, walking toward a rainbow. At the bottom, in her still childish handwriting, was written, "Me and my daddy forever." Now he knew that it was the easiest promise he had ever made, because she wasn't just his daughter. She had become his purpose, his redemption, his second chance to do what really mattered. The next day, they would visit the welcoming center together. She would help serve lunch to the new children who had arrived during the week, tell stories during quiet time, and prove once again that true love knows no social, economic, or any other kind of barriers. And at the end of the day, they would return home together, father and daughter, two puzzle pieces that had found exactly where they belonged. The story that had begun with rejection and cruelty on a cold Christmas Eve had transformed into something much bigger, a journey of redemption, a lesson about the transformative power of unconditional love, and proof that sometimes the most precious gifts come to us disguised as problems we would rather avoid. The millionaire had discovered that his greatest wealth wasn't in his bank accounts, but in the bright eyes of the girl who called him Daddy. And she had discovered that she had never really been lost, just waiting for the right moment to find her way home. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to receive new stories every day. What would you do in the millionaire's place? Comment below and share this story with someone special.